Hi, welcome. Serene Priestess Ablosi here, formerly known as Priestess Gorgeous, also known as Baba Sakata, Archangel Zaskiel, Papa T. Anyways, a little bit of echo maybe, a little bit of noise in the background maybe, show must go on, let us continue. I came today to talk about the ego. It is a complex idea, this ego, but essentially it is the mechanism that drives the self. Now, for me, ego is a mechanism, a tool, technology that I use to frame that we as a school, we as a community, me mainly, use to frame the self in the new world technology, that science books, religious books, history books, and then I will reframe it yet again, or I'll add to the scaffolding of that concept and idea of the old world, the sacred world. Okay, so I'll do that today. So ego is anything with the word I, it's anything that's self-interest, and you can be egotistical, you can be egomaniacal, you can be egocentric, but it's a self-concept. Now, essentially, beyond the science, beyond the technology, ego is just a sense of self-survival. So it is something that's driving, but I don't remember which little, okay, I was going to say something mean. I don't know which little, okay, there's no niceness in there, so we don't really like this then. But there's the ego, the superego, and the id, right? So the id is that subconscious, instinctual nature, that superego or superconscious, that's that aware and awake with calculating motives and drives, calculating operandi, okay? And then the ego is just that sense of self-awareness. It's this construct of processing, okay? So it's this moralizing, justifying aspect of ourselves. And the ego is a mechanism of self. However, there must be more than ego. To me, ego is like a stepping stone or a stool or a table for the conscious to come in and do its work. Without the ego, you're not going to be able to do transcendental meditation because the ego is what keeps you running from a lion. And if you're meditating at the base of a tree and some lion is trying to eat you, you shouldn't be trying to meditate. Now, there are some types of meditation that will send that lion away, but then you need to see yourself as a lion as well. Okay, so just for today, we do have a negative connotation to ego because a person can be self-obsessed. They can be self-centered. They can see the world through their own eyes. And that can color their interactions if they're uninvolved. So when I use the word higher vibration, lower vibration, it's not about better than, less than, it's about proximate cause. It's like an address and a dimension. Think of it that way. So the ego is a function of the base personality. It's a base personality. Okay. The ego is a base personality and its purpose is for survival. And it is basically unconscious, but it's not entirely unconscious. There are parts of it that are aware, awake, calculated. Now, normally that part of our ego is a moralizing, justifying nature. Okay, and that's actually called conscientiousness at its highest aspect. But essentially, we want to minimize the ego. We want to minimize the need for I. We want to minimize the need for me. We want to minimize the need to be recognized by external people, places, and things. Because that brings a sense of contentment. And if we're doing gratitude exercises as well, or prayer, actual prayer, good prayer, we're doing prayer, it'll be different. Okay. So ego is great because it helps with existence, survival, right? It is a base instinct. But when we live in a maladaptive world like the new world, this matrix, and all of us are taking this blue pill and choosing to be stupid, act stupid, The ego is a form, a mechanism for enslavement. So now let's talk about the Luciferian Satanist agenda, ultimately called the NAA. We don't know if it's the negative archon agenda, negative alien agenda. Let's just call it the dark cabal, the global elite, the ones that are the controllers. Okay? Because you're Illuminati doesn't mean that you're evil. Illuminati means you're illuminated. Okay? You may have a secret. You may have the secret. In this world, this planet, the surface of the earth is a secret. 98% of the people on the surface of the planet are under some type of control. And the easiest way to control them is to not let them know they're under some type of control. So we can begin to measure this. Think about it. How do they get you to give up your power? How do they get you to give up your will? They need to convince you that you need security. Okay? So think about it. Who is really willing to give up freedom for a little extra security? Because some philosophers argue that if you give up a little bit of freedom for security, you actually deserve neither. I'm in alignment with that concept and idea. I definitely agree with the sentiment. I might arrive at a different conclusion all the same. Okay, so, arrive at that assessment on your own. But this is the basis of the ego. Okay, because ego in the new world, ego in the fake world, ego in the fictitious world is a mechanism for enslavement. So Luciferian agenda is the concept and idea, the objective of the Luciferian agenda is to remove a person's self-worth and value. To essentially enamor them, enslave them with lesser magic, to have them give up their own power. To invert themselves. So in that sense, I do like to use the word ego for the lesser self. Because the higher self is really when you hold space for a virtue to come in and do its work, and you spend enough time identifying and interacting with that virtue, so much so where it becomes your second nature. See, the ego is the first nature, it's the primal nature, but it does have a mental aspect, and that's typically when we get effed up. So before I move on from the Luciferian agenda, the difference between the Luciferian agenda and the Satanist agenda is the Luciferian agenda is the false father, the Satanist agenda is the false mother. Unlike the Luciferian agenda, to eradicate or at least remove or detach you from your self-worth and value, which is the first power, they want to remove you in the Satanist agenda from your strength, courage, and wisdom. So instead of being anti-individual, anti-love ascended humanistic beings, that's the Luciferian agenda trying to take that away. The Satanist agenda is to take us off the face of this earth, to destroy life, to give life a different meaning enslavement. That makes sense. They want to put everybody on a hive mind. And if you don't operate like the controller wants you to, then you're a dirty computer and defective, or we need to break you and render you for parts. So that requires strength, courage, and wisdom, which is the level up from self-worth and value. You can never have faith, hope, and optimism without both of these things, self-worth and value, and strength, courage, and wisdom. But you see, the Satanist agenda wants you to use your super ego to either be a controller or to be a victim. Okay? So it would be the ego that identifies the actual abuse, the actual event of trauma that you would decide to be a victim in, because you can be victimized, but being a victim is a choice. It's literally a matter of language, because the other language is survivor. This trauma, I experienced this trauma, it left me this wound. I may be managing those triggers for the rest of my life, but I have these tools and technology because I'm alive inside myself. I'm in alignment inside myself. And my higher self has chosen to guide me into a practice around these traumas that my lower self can enslave me with at any time. Okay, traumas typically lead to triggers. And if you are succumb to triggers all the time, that's the ego. It's basically the subconscious self. So these are some beginning places, because a lot of us need to know the why of the why of the why of the why. I was talking about noise, that might be some of it. Exploratory, curiosity, that's all great, but there does need to be something higher than yourself, bigger than yourself, loving, caring, and kind that you subscribe to. And A lot of us don't always use source, creator, Lisa, Bandiu. We don't use a spiritual connection always. It can just be humanity. You might not like individual humans, but you realize that humanity is pretty on and popping, pretty great. Okay. It might be the collective. Okay. You might subscribe to a group as your higher power. A lot of people do that in the 12 steps in the beginning because they are trying to earnestly work a program and they just can't wrap their head around the concept and idea of a higher power, a God. And so their God is the rooms, the God is the group, the God is the actual meeting collective in that moment, in that hour of recovery. And when I say their God, substitute the word higher power. But you see, when you go above the super ego, this calculating, moralistic, judgmental aspect of the ego, then we move into conscious. Okay. So now I want to reframe this because we have the id, the ego, the superego. Well, we also have the instinct. And built on top of that is intuition. And built on top of that is intellect. And built on top of that is identity. And that resonates more with me. Because the intuition means now you're a love ascended being. You're at least able to operate in the third, fourth dimension and not be succumb to all the forces because you're either prey or predator. Until you're at that place of a love ascended being where you can receive harm and separate the behavior from the person, place, or thing. So the contrast for me is to talk about earthbound spirits because then you understand the concept and idea of attachment. Okay. But we don't want to go over on time. So let's talk about it in terms of a solution. Ego. Ego is great for survival. It's great for self-knowing. It's great for self-interest. But that's really more of a place of confirmation. So you need to become acquainted with the ego, in my opinion, my professional opinion, and then you need to reduce it, minimize it. Okay. It's like a bad relationship. You don't want to feed it any more than you have to. I don't want us to be antagonistic to ourselves, but I love to introduce it like that. Okay? Because what we need to combat the ego is humility. Think of it this way. I've said, humility is the thing that keeps the devil out. So we have the five senses, and the ego ties into this as well because it's physical survival. That's the purpose of the ego. So you have touch, taste, smell, sound, and sight. Okay? And then the sixth sense would be the mind. I know a lot of people think it's like the clair, but actually the clairs all mirror the physical senses. You have clairaudient, clairaudience, claircognizance, clairsentience, clairvoyance. So the sixth sense is actually the mind. And the thing about the devil is the devil works from the outside in. What is the devil? The devil wants to make your energy spiral downwards, spiral to your basal self, spiral to your instincts, and not up to your identity. Because your identity is actually in alignment with God, in alignment with your crown spirit. Okay? So the devil wants to separate you from eternity and make you very finite right now. Wants you to focus on your physical life and not your eternal life. And God or Creator or Lisa, Bandio, however you call it, wants you to spiral upwards towards unity and universal love. Okay? Unconditional love vibration. Okay? Now that, as you can see, as you can hear, is a bit better. Does that make sense? So the thing about that is you want to stay prayed up. You want to stay meditated up. You want to stay in a higher consciousness, not a lower consciousness. Because if you're at a lower consciousness, basically what's happened is the devil has taken over one of your five physical senses and then it's gotten into your mind. When you give the devil too much of your one physical sense, touch, taste, smell, whatever, too much TV, too much sex, too much food, too much whatever, I don't know, I don't care. What happens is they take over your mind. You start moralizing, justifying. Your morality is weird. Morality versus ethics. Morality is what is right versus wrong. Ethics is what is acceptable versus not acceptable. So your morality goes downwards when the devil gets a hold of one of your five senses, because then he gets into your mind. The moment he gets into your mind, they, she, he, she, it, they, it starts pushing the God out. So that's what we want to prevent. And the easiest way to prevent this is to be humble. And humility requires a lot of work. It requires going to your ugly self and releasing it. Forgiving yourself for who you have to be to get to where you are, and recognizing that once you know better, you do better, because you were at one point ignorant of your true nature, your true purpose here in this world. And now that you're aware of your spirit, karma, life, path, destiny, you can walk in alignment with that through this world. Okay? So this is the ego. It's that part of you that is necessary, like a family member relationship, but you don't want to feed it too much because they may be toxic. So remember, we have the id, really, and then the ego, and then the superego, or we have this basal instincts, which is the base. Built on top of that is the intuition. Built on top of that is the intellect. Built on top of that is the identity. So what we want to do is stay prayed up, loved up, so that the devil stays on the outside. Because sometimes the devil sometimes you got to do some hard work. What happens if you need to, haul a demolished building in like 2 weeks or something? You're gonna need some elbow grease for that. That physical force, that digging under the ground, that's the devil energy too. It doesn't always have to be bad. It just means underworld. This means things are in the dark. Okay, you want things to be in the light. You want darkness to be dispelled, because when you turn the light on in a dark room, the cockroaches run back to the corner. Sometimes your light is going to expel demons, and that's why people are popping up at the mouth at you. And if you were full of your ego, you would be caring about what they were saying. And if you were prayed up and God full, what would happen is it wouldn't align with your sense of self, and you'd be able to laugh it off or be confused. Okay, peace be upon you, peace be with you.